The essence of the early stages of William's revolution at the BBC was its crossing of style, era, and all other barriers, and the intermingling or the straight juxtaposing of opposites or likenesses across the centuries.
The BBC followed quite naturally from all sorts of things, really, although it caused such surprise. You know that Walter Legg wrote me an entrancing note when my appointment was made public on February the 13th, 1959. Dear William, I don't know whether I'm more surprised or delighted. I feel rather as though I were a citizen of Wittenberg in 1536 and Luther had just been elected Pope.
One of William's first achievements, indeed aims, I would say, was to recover from the pre-war years a progressive drive with regard to music in all its aspects, but particularly, of course, contemporary music, because contemporary music was seen by him and by everyone around him as the crucial thing. There had to be, in some sense, a larger articulation of the revolution he'd already effected in Dartington and through the score.
Some important concerts were planned by a committee. And I've never thought that any important artistic undertaking can be planned by a committee. So I decided to take over the Proms myself, and I was reported as a Hitler over the road, broadcasting house, for trying to bring the BBC music and the Proms to ruin. However, I went over and defended myself against that. And what I was really doing was to try and enact the policy that I believed in. The next thing was to get hold of a very fine staff. And Hans Keller came in, and Stephen Plaistow, and Leo Black, and Alexander Gurr, and David Drew.
The appointment of Hans Keller was the most characteristic of all, precisely because it was an appointment of somebody who was contrary to William in almost every single respect. So the view of William as somebody, since he has strong opinions and carries them through, as being in some sense autocratic, is, I think, absolutely false. And I stress the characteristic nature of this appointment because it was in the sense there are going to be difficulties and rows, but working with somebody like Keller is actually what work is about, and it's not working with yes men, working with no men, or perhaps men, and let's talk it through men. That is part of William's collaborative personality.
What's rather surprising fact is that we were both shy people. So, I found him extraordinarily easy to work with, presumably because in some way we were in sympathy with each other, I suppose. After a time, I realized I'd spent the first 45 years of my life just ticking over. And I can remember times after a particularly sort of fruitful session, I'd go back to my office almost walking on air because of these wonderful ideas that I had to get on with. It was something, you know, I'd never experienced anything like this before.
Very well done. Very lively. It's a marvellous movement, that, isn't it?
Yes, it's very much out of context here.
Yes.
After what has gone before, because
I was here during the very early 1980s when Maxwell Davies was directing the summer school and I was teaching the composition course. And I felt very motivated then coming here and working. One was in an environment where analysis was taken extremely seriously, and the composing course, which is the more distinguished, I think, outgrowth of Dartington, the one for which it's most famous musically.
And then the piece takes it to bits, so you get a relaxation of energy in the middle.
In his composition class, Robert Saxton is analysing with his pupils one of Glock's particular enthusiasms, the music of Elliott Carter.
An inverted arch energy-wise. And what you've got here is something that's very important. I know some of you have been talking to me about whether your ideas are purely abstract or whether they have dramatic or extra musical connotations. Here you have a composer who's written a piece which, in a Beethovenian sense, is entirely self-sufficient, and yet at the same time is a vast tone poem.
I suppose my tendency has always been to support works that are challenging and exciting. You know that Elliott Carter once said that music should be as intellectually challenging as the best poetry or philosophy, and as complex as natural phenomena or cities.
The English public and English music should have the best of contemporary music presented to it in the best possible way. I think that was his policy. Now, I have a feeling that he didn't always choose music that he thought that he loved himself that much, but that he thought should be played because it was represented an important trend in music. The hiring certainly of Pierre Boulez for the BBC Symphony was a sample of this.
It was always a pleasure to work with him, not only because he is very intelligent and a man of extremely attractive relationship, if I may say so, because he has a great seduction in spite of his aloofness sometimes. You have the impression that he's very much alone, but on the contrary, I find him very seductive in this sense.
In 1964, he gave his first concert at the Festival Hall, and they were a revelation. I mean, these works were fresh to him, they were fresh to the orchestra, and not only in Webern, which one heard for the first time, really, as it should be played, but in Debussy and in Stravinsky. The music was realized from within, so to speak, as it very rarely is. And you know, Klemperer used to come to many of his rehearsals, and Boulez's ear was fabulous. I mean, it was as though he were attached by 100 invisible threads to every member of the orchestra.
I wanted to show red lines through program, and he taught me how not to show it too much, and how to make a program which could convey some ideas, but not convey it too obviously.
We were two opposites in a way. I mean, he was a theorist and a thinker, and I just tried one thing after another. But he listened to me if I thought that something perhaps was overdoing it, and I listened to him if he could convince me that I was being half-hearted. And it was a very, very happy collaboration.
After a season, you don't say, well, I have heard marvelous concerts, but there is absolutely no junction between these concerts. And also, if you remember only the junction and not at all the appeal of good performances, then also you miss the point. And I think also, I mean, for this reason, we work together very well. But I think I learned with him, yes, much more than he learned with me.